Min-jae didn't knock. He didn't ask permission. He didn't pause to consider consequences or sanity or the fact that what he was about to do would cement his legacy as the monster everyone already believed him to be. He crashed through the garden entrance doors with such violence they slammed against the walls, hinges screaming, with splintering, and every single head in that wedding venue turned as one toward the sound of destruction invading paradise. 300 guests gasped in perfect unison, their celebration suspended mid-breath as Min-jae stumbled into view like something dragged up from hell, his expensive suit wrinkled beyond recognition, his hair wild and unwashed, his eyes carrying the kind of desperate madness that makes strangers instinctively reach for their children and pull them close. And he screamed her name, not called it, not spoke it, screamed it like a drowning man calling for rescue, like a wounded animal howling at the moon, like someone whose sanity had finally shattered into pieces so small they could never be reassembled. Nkiru, please, you can't do this. The music stopped, time fractured, and every eye in that beautiful Lagos garden locked on three people whose fates had collided in this single devastating moment. Nkiru stood frozen at the altar in her stunning wedding dress, white lace and traditional Nigerian fabric, combining into something that should have made this the happiest moment of her life. But her face had drained of all color, her mouth falling open in a silent scream of horror and disbelief, her hands gripping her bouquet so tightly the flowers were being crushed into pulp. She was staring at a ghost, at the nightmare she thought she had buried 8 years ago when she fled Korea with nothing but her daughter and shattered dreams, at the man who had slapped her across the face to defend his mistress, at the husband she had never divorced because doing so meant opening doors she desperately needed to keep locked. Min-jae, her destroyer, her trauma made flesh, standing in her sanctuary, violating her peace, proving that some monsters refuse to stay in the past where they belong. Beside her, Chidi transformed in an instant from gentle groom to protective warrior. This man who had spent 2 years courting Kiru with patience and kindness, who had loved her 3 children without question or condition, who had rebuilt what Min-jae destroyed brick by careful brick, now moved with the swift, decisive violence of someone who will die before letting harm touch his family. He positioned his body between Kiru and the madman stumbling down the aisle, his architect's hands curling into fists for perhaps the first time in his peaceful life, his usually kind face hardening into something that promised consequences for anyone who threatened what he had built. "You need to leave," Chidi said, his voice carrying across the stunned, silent garden with absolute authority. "Now, before I make you." He had never met Min-jae, had only heard the stories Nkiru whispered in darkness about the man who had shattered her. But he knew immediately who this was. The biological father. The villain. The ghost who had just materialized to haunt their happiness. And Chidi, looking at this wreck of a man with expensive clothes and cheap desperation, understood with crystalline clarity that he was staring at everything he had promised to protect Nkiru from, everything she feared, everything she had run from, now standing in their sacred space demanding recognition he had violently forfeited years ago. Min-jae barely registered Chidi's words, barely processed this stranger standing between him and his wife, his sons, his family. If this is your first time here, welcome. Please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss stories like this. Before we continue, this is part 3 of an explosive journey. If you haven't watched part 1 and part 2 yet, please pause right now and go watch them first so you understand the full story. Trust me, you need to know how we got here. Now, let's get back to the chaos. His eyes were scanning the crowd frantically, desperately, searching for small faces he had only seen in surveillance photographs, looking for the children he had flown 7,000 miles to claim. And then he found them, standing at the altar in miniature suits that matched Chidi's, their faces perfect mirrors of Min-jae's own features, undeniable proof that his DNA lived in their blood, that Nkiru had given him exactly what he destroyed his marriage pursuing. Chijioke and Chukwemeka, his sons, his male heirs, 8 years old and staring at him with confusion and growing fear, pressed against each other like small animals sensing predator, not recognizing the stranger whose genetics they carried, not understanding why this loud, angry man was making their mother cry on what was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. "My boys," Min-jae whispered, the words scraping out of his throat like broken glass. "My sons." He took a stumbling step forward, his hands reaching out in supplication or demand or desperate need for connection. Tears streaming down his face, unchecked and unashamed. "I'm your father. I'm your father, and I've come to meet you. I've come to tell you I exist. I've come to—" But he never finished that sentence because the twins, instead of recognition or curiosity or even neutral confusion, did something that destroyed Min-jae more completely than any words or rejection ever could. They screamed. High-pitched sounds of pure terror, the kind of sounds children make when confronted with something that triggers every instinctive alarm, every primal warning that says danger, threat, run. And they didn't run to Min-jae. They scrambled behind Chitty's legs, their small hands clutching his pants, their faces pressing into his thighs, seeking protection from the scary stranger who was shouting and crying and making their world feel unsafe. "Papa!" They cried in perfect unison, their voices breaking with fear. "Papa, we're scared. Make him go away." That word, Papa, directed at another man, at the stranger who had replaced him, at someone who had earned the title through bedtime stories and patient explanations and gentle hands that never threatened violence. That word punched through Min-jae's chest and ripped out whatever was left of his heart, leaving a cavity so vast and empty, he felt like he might collapse inward into nothingness. His sons were terrified of him. His sons were calling another man father. His sons didn't know him and wanted him gone. Everything he had sacrificed, everything he had destroyed, everything he had lost. It was all for these two boys who were crying because he existed, who were seeking protection from him, who saw him not as family but as threat. The garden erupted into chaos. Guests were standing now, murmuring anxiously, some pulling out phones to record this disaster, others moving toward the exits in case this unstable man became violent. Security guards who had been stationed discreetly around the perimeter were converging on Min-jae, their hands hovering near weapons they hoped they wouldn't need to use, their eyes assessing whether this was a simple disturbance or the beginning of something far more dangerous. And in the midst of all this commotion, another voice cut through the noise like a knife through flesh, a voice Min-jae hadn't heard in 8 years but would recognize anywhere, in any language, in any lifetime. "Daddy!" Ada stood off to the side in her bridesmaid dress, her mixed features frozen in an expression of horror and recognition and dawning comprehension that was physically painful to witness. She looked older than 18, looked like she had aged years in the seconds since Min-jae crashed through those doors, her eyes wide and filling with tears that had nothing to do with joy and everything to do with betrayal so profound it rewrote her understanding of reality. "You!" she whispered, her voice shaking. Min-jae's head swiveled toward his daughter, his eldest child, his baby girl who used to wrap her small arms around his neck and tell him she loved him more than the moon and stars combined. "Ada," he choked out, reaching toward her with trembling hands. "My baby girl." But Ada was shaking her head violently, backing away from him like he carried plague, her tears flowing freely now, her voice rising with each word. "You don't get to call me that. You don't get to call me your baby girl or pretend you were protecting me. You made that choice for me just like you made every choice for Mom, controlling and possessing and taking what wasn't yours to take." She wrapped her arms around herself, a protective gesture that spoke volumes about how unsafe she felt in his presence. "You're the man who destroyed my childhood. You're the reason I have PTSD. You're biology, not family. And I want you to leave. Go and meet the woman you choose over my mommy. Because we have moved on already and we have new family now." Min-jae staggered under the weight of his daughter's words, each sentence hitting like physical blows, each accusation landing with the precision of someone who had spent years thinking about what she would say if given the chance. He tried to speak, tried to defend himself, tried to explain that he had changed, that he was sorry, that he deserved a chance to make amends. But no words came because somewhere deep in whatever was left of his soul, he knew Ada was right. He had stalked her. He had violated her privacy. He had taken her DNA without consent because he needed proof more than he needed to respect her autonomy. He had done exactly what he always did. Taken what he wanted without asking, controlled without permission, demanded rather than requested. Even his attempt at reunion was just another form of violation. Another demonstration that he had learned nothing, changed nothing, grown not at all from the man who had slapped his wife to defend his mistress 8 years ago. Chidi watched this exchange with growing understanding of just how deep the damage ran, just how thoroughly Min-jae had poisoned every relationship he touched. And when Min-jae took a stumbling step toward Ada, when his hand reached out again in that grasping, demanding way that showed he still thought he had rights to touch her, to demand her attention, to force his presence into her life, Chidi moved. Not with rage or violence, but with the calm, decisive action of a man protecting his family from a threat that refuses to acknowledge it has no place here. He stepped between Min-jae and Ada, his body a wall, his voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous that carried more menace than any shout ever could. She told you to leave. Now I'm telling you, get out of this garden. Get away from these children. Get out of Nigeria if you have any sense of self-preservation left. Because if you take one more step toward anyone in this family, if you make one more demand, if you utter one more claim to rights you violently surrendered, I will have you arrested, detained, and deported so fast you'll think the ground opened up and swallowed you whole. Min-jae finally really looked at the man who had replaced him. Chidi was everything Min-jae wasn't. Calm where Min-jae was chaos. Protective where Min-jae had been threatening. Loved where Min-jae was merely tolerated out of biological obligation. This man had done what Min-jae never managed. He had earned the title of father, of husband, of protector, not through violence or control or biological claim, but through showing up, through consistency, through choosing love every single day even when it was hard, even when it meant defending against ghosts from the past, even when it meant standing between danger and the people he loved. Those are my sons, Min-jae said, but his voice had lost its conviction, had become a hollow echo of the certainty he had carried onto that plane in Seoul. Those are my sons, Min-jae repeated, but the words sounded pathetic even to his own ears, a desperate claim to ownership of something he had never actually possessed. They carry my DNA. They look exactly like me. They're my blood, my male heirs, the sons I destroyed everything for. You can't just take them. You can't just erase me from their lives. I have rights. Chidi's expression didn't change, didn't soften with pity or harden with rage, just remained steady and immovable as stone. Rights? He repeated quietly, letting the word hang in the air like something rotten. You think you have rights? Let me tell you about rights. Rights are earned through midnight fevers and scared phone calls to doctors. Rights are built through homework help and scraped knees bandaged with gentle hands. Rights are constructed from thousands of tiny moments where you show up, where you choose your children over your ego, where you protect instead of threaten. You have DNA. That's biology, not rights. Those boys don't know you. They don't want to know you. And I will spend every remaining breath in my body making sure they never have to. He stepped closer to Min-jae, close enough that only Min-jae could hear his next words, his voice dropping to something that promised consequences beyond anything security guards could deliver. You hit their mother while she was pregnant with them. You slapped her across the face to defend the woman you were cheating with, and she was carrying your sons in her womb while you did it. Do you understand what that means? You committed violence against your own children before they were even born. You forfeited every right the moment your hand connected with her face. Now leave before I forget. I'm a peaceful man, and show you what it feels like to be hit by someone bigger and stronger who claims to love you. The threat hung between them, and Min-jae, seeing something implacable and utterly serious in Chidi's eyes, finally understood that he had lost. Not just this moment, not just this confrontation, but everything. Permanently, irrevocably, with finality that no amount of DNA or biological claim or desperate pleading could overcome. But understanding loss and accepting it are two different things entirely, and Min-jae, driven by obsession that had survived 8 years of separation and an ocean of distance, and the complete destruction of his life, couldn't simply surrender. Not when his sons stood so close. Not when one conversation, one explanation, one chance to tell them who he was might change everything. He tried to push past Chidi, tried to reach the twins who were still hiding behind their father's legs, still crying, still terrified. Please, Min-jae begged, his voice breaking into pieces. Just let me talk to them. Just let me tell them I exist. Just let me say I'm their father. That's all I want. 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes to tell them who I am. But before he could take another step, before he could get any closer to the children who didn't want him, Nkiru's voice cut through the chaos with a clarity and power that made everyone freeze. Stop. Just one word, but it carried the weight of 8 years of survival, of rebuilding herself from ashes, of learning her own strength, of understanding that mercy doesn't mean allowing yourself to be violated again and again by the same person who broke you the first time. Nkiru stepped forward, away from the protective circle of her family, and looked directly at Min-jae for the first time since he crashed through those doors. Her face was no longer pale with shock but flushed with something that looked like rage and grief and finality all mixed together into an emotion so complex it didn't have a name. You want to talk to them? Nkiru asked, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. You want 5 minutes to tell them who you are? Fine. Let me tell them for you. She turned to her sons, to Chijiok and Chukwamika who were peeking out from behind Chidi with wide frightened eyes, and knelt down to their level so she could look directly into faces that carried their father's features. Boys, this man says he's your father. And biologically, that's true. He contributed DNA. But let me tell you who he really is, what that word father means when it comes from his mouth. Her voice was gentle despite the devastating words she was about to speak, her hands reaching out to stroke her sons' faces with infinite tenderness. This man slapped mommy across the face 8 years ago. He hit me so hard I fell down. He did it to defend another woman he was cheating with, and when he hit me you were in my tummy. Both of you. You were tiny and growing and I was carrying you inside me, and he hit me while you were there. He hurt your mommy while you were part of her body. The twins' faces showed confusion and horror, their young minds trying to process information too terrible for children to understand. Chukwamika, the more outspoken twin, whispered, He hurt you while we were in your tummy? Kiru nodded, tears flowing freely now but her voice remaining steady. Yes, baby. He hurt me while you were inside me. And then we ran away because mommy was scared he would hurt us more. We came to Nigeria to be safe. We came home to Lagos where grandma and aunties and uncles could protect us. And then you were born, and you were so beautiful, so perfect, and mommy promised you would never know violence, would never know fear, would never know what it feels like to have someone who's supposed to love you raise their hand to hurt you instead. Chijiok, the quieter twin, looked at Min-jae with something that might have been curiosity, or might have been the beginning of understanding that adults sometimes fail in catastrophic ways. Why did you hit mommy? He asked, his small voice carrying across the silent garden. Why did you hurt her when we were in her tummy? Min-jae opened his mouth to answer, to explain, to justify, to somehow make an 8-year-old understand the complexity of rage and betrayal and obsession that had driven him to violence. But no words came. What could he possibly say? How could he explain to an 8-year-old that he had hit their mother because she pushed his mistress, because his rage had exploded, because in that moment his obsession with control mattered more than love or family or the vows he had made? How could he make a child understand something he didn't understand himself? Something that had destroyed everything he touched. Something that had turned him into the monster standing in a garden surrounded by people who wanted him gone. I was angry, Min-jae finally whispered. The words inadequate and pathetic and absolutely true. I was so angry and I made a terrible mistake and I've regretted it every single day since and I'm so sorry. But Chijiok, with the brutal honesty that only children possess, shook his head slowly. Papa says people who love you don't hit you when they're angry. Papa says real daddies protect their families, not hurt them. Papa says... He stopped, looking up at Chidi with pure, uncomplicated adoration. Papa says love is gentle. Those words, spoken in a child's clear voice, comparing Min-jae's violence to Chidi's gentleness, comparing biological father to chosen father and finding the biology wanting, shattered something fundamental in Min-jae's chest. His sons had a father, a real father, someone who taught them that love is gentle, that anger doesn't justify violence, that protection matters more than possession. And that father wasn't him, would never be him, because he had proven, over and over across 8 years and 7,000 miles, that he was incapable of being what these children deserved. Nkiru stood then, her hands moving to her son's shoulders, her body positioning itself between them and Min-jae in a protective stance that spoke louder than any words. You wanted sons to carry your name. she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the garden, to every witness watching this confrontation, ensuring that everyone would know, would understand, would remember what happened here. I gave birth to them, alone, in a Lagos hospital while you were drunk in Seoul mourning your failed wedding to a woman who lied to escape you. I screamed through 16 hours of labor without you. I held them when they were born without you. I named them without you, Chijioke and Chukwemeka, strong Nigerian names that anchor them to my heritage, to my people, to a lineage that has nothing to do with Korean mafia bosses or obsessions with male heirs. She paused, letting her words sink in, watching Min-jae's face crumple with each sentence. They have MY name, not yours. They speak MY language. They know MY family. You wanted a family, and I built one without you. I built it from the rubble you created, from the ashes of what you destroyed, and I built it stronger and better and filled with the one thing you never gave us, safety. Her voice dropped lower, more intense, every word a nail in the coffin of his claim. You want forgiveness? Fine. I forgive you. I released the anger because carrying it was poisoning me, was giving you power over my peace, was letting you live rent-free in my head. I forgive you for slapping me. I forgive you for choosing your mistress. I forgive you for destroying our marriage. I forgive you for making our daughter afraid of her own father. I forgive you for all of it. She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could see the tears on her face, close enough that he could see the strength she had forged from his violence. But forgiveness doesn't mean restoration. Forgiveness doesn't mean you get access to the children you abandoned. Forgiveness doesn't mean I pretend the past didn't happen or that you deserve a place in the future I'm building. Forgiveness means I let go of the hate so it doesn't destroy me. It doesn't mean you get what you want. You lost us the moment you chose violence. These are the consequences of your choices. Now live with them. She turned to the security guards who had been waiting for permission to act. Remove him. Now. The guards moved immediately, their hands gripping Min-jae's arms with professional efficiency, hauling him to his feet when his legs threatened to give out, beginning the process of escorting him from the garden he had violated with his presence. But Min-jae wasn't done. Couldn't be done. The obsession that had driven him across an ocean wouldn't surrender to logic or consequences or the clear rejection of everyone he claimed to love. He fought against the guard's grip, struggled and twisted and screamed with a desperation that made him look feral, made him look exactly like the unstable, dangerous man everyone feared he was. No! Wait! Please! His voice cracked and broke, rising to a pitch that was barely human. You can't do this. Those are my sons. I have rights. I'm their father. The guards dragged him backward, his expensive shoes scraping against the ground, leaving marks on the decorative stone pathway, marks that would be swept away within hours, erased like his claim to this family. And as they pulled him toward the exit, as the distance between him and his children grew with each forced step, Min-jae played his final card, screamed the truth he thought would change everything. I'm your father, he howled at the twins, his face red and streaked with tears and snot, all dignity abandoned, all pride shattered. Chijioke, Chukwemeka, I'm your father. You have to know. I'm your real father. My blood is in your veins. I'm your father. But the twins, instead of recognition or curiosity or even confusion, reacted with pure instinctive terror. They screamed back at him, their voices high and frightened and absolutely devastating in their clarity. That's not our daddy. They cried in perfect unison, their small bodies pressing harder against Chitty, their faces wet with tears of fear. Our daddy is Chitty. You're not our daddy. Make him go away. Papa. Make him stop. Those words, that's not our daddy, about someone else, Papa directed at another man. Make him go away, treating him like a threat to be removed rather than family to be embraced. Those words accomplished what 8 years of separation and an ocean of distance and complete life destruction hadn't managed. They broke Min-jae completely, shattered him so thoroughly that the pieces could never be reassembled into anything resembling a functional human being. His legs gave out entirely and the guards were no longer escorting him but dragging dead weight, hauling a man who had collapsed under the unbearable reality that his own children, his blood, his male heirs, rejected him so completely they couldn't even comprehend he had any claim to the title father. Through tear-blurred vision, through the fog of complete psychological breakdown, Min-jae watched as Chitty knelt down and gathered both twins into his arms, murmuring comfort and reassurance, promising them the scary man was leaving and would never hurt them, stroking their hair with gentle hands that had never raised in anger, being the father Min-jae had never learned how to be. He watched Ada turn away, unable to even look at him, her shoulders shaking with sobs as other bridesmaids surrounded her with comfort and support. He watched Nkiru take a deep breath, square her shoulders, and turn back toward the altar where her future waited, where happiness existed in a space he couldn't contaminate, where she was choosing herself and her children and peace over the chaos he represented. The guards pulled him through the exit, the garden doors closing behind him with finality that sounded like a coffin lid sealing, shutting him out of his family's life forever. And in that moment, being dragged through a Lagos garden while his sons screamed that he wasn't their father, Min-jae finally understood with devastating clarity what Nkiru had tried to tell him. Some consequences are permanent, some damage cannot be repaired. Some families, once destroyed through violence, cannot be resurrected through tears or DNA or desperate ocean-crossing gestures that prove nothing except that obsession outlives love. The last sound he heard before the doors closed completely was music starting again. The ceremony resuming, life continuing as if he had never existed. As if his interruption was just a brief storm that passed, leaving the sunshine even brighter in its wake. Hours later, Min-jae sat in a dirty Lagos jail cell, arrested for trespassing, disturbing the peace, and creating a public disturbance. The concrete walls were covered in graffiti he couldn't read. The air reeked of urine and despair and the accumulated misery of people who had made catastrophic choices and were paying prices they couldn't afford. Other inmates watched him with curiosity and contempt. This foreign man in an expensive ruined suit. This person who clearly didn't belong here but somehow had ended up exactly where he deserved. And in the silence of that cell, with nothing but the echo of his son's screaming, "That's not our daddy," playing on endless repeat in his fractured mind, Min-jae finally, definitively, irreversibly accepted the truth he had been running from for 8 years. He would never know his sons. Not their favorite colors or their fears or their dreams or the sound of their laughter when something genuinely delighted them. He would never rebuild his family. Not through apologies or changed behavior or years of therapy or any amount of regret. He would never undo what he destroyed. Not the marriage or the childhood or the trust or the love that had once existed before he turned it into ash with his own violent hands. Some losses are permanent. Some consequences cannot be escaped. Some men don't get redemption because redemption requires change, and he had proven, by flying 7,000 miles to crash a ceremony and traumatize children in front of 300 witnesses, that he was fundamentally incapable of becoming anything other than what he had always been. A man who takes without asking, who demands without earning, who believes biology grants ownership over human beings, who mistakes obsession for love and control for protection. 3 weeks later, after being released from jail with a permanent ban from re-entering Nigeria, Min-jae returned to Seoul. His business had collapsed completely during his absence, his few remaining associates having finally abandoned ship when the boss disappeared without warning to chase ghosts in Africa. His penthouse, once a symbol of power and success, now felt like a mausoleum, every room echoing with the absence of people who would never return. He sold what little remained, moved to a modest apartment in a neighborhood where no one knew his name or his story, and began the process of learning how to exist in the world he had destroyed. And that's when the letter arrived. Plain white envelope, unfamiliar handwriting, Seoul postmark. From Ada. His hands shook so badly he could barely open it. His heart pounding with desperate hope that maybe she had reconsidered, maybe she wanted a relationship, maybe forgiveness was possible. But the first line destroyed that hope with surgical precision. "I think it's time we talked about what you did to our family, and why I can never call you father again." Min-jae's vision blurred as he read his daughter's words, each sentence carefully constructed to ensure he understood exactly what he had cost her, what he had taken, what he had destroyed. She wrote about nightmares that lasted years, about therapy sessions where she learned his violence wasn't her fault, about relationships she struggled to build because her first model of masculinity had been a man who hit women to defend his pride. She wrote about watching her mother rebuild from nothing, about her brothers growing up gentle because Chitty showed them a different way, about a family that thrived specifically because he wasn't in it. And then, in the final paragraph, she delivered the words that would define the rest of Min-jae's existence. "You're not my father. You're a biological accident, nothing more. I don't hate you because hate requires caring, and I don't care about you at all. You're irrelevant to my life, to my brother's lives, to my mother's life. We are complete without you. We are better without you. And I need you to know that, to carry that knowledge every remaining day of your life. So you understand that your absence isn't a tragedy we're recovering from but a blessing we're grateful for. Don't contact me again. Don't try to reach my brothers. Don't send letters or gifts or apologies. Just exist in whatever shadow you've made for yourself and know that we are happy, we are whole, and we are finally free. Min-jae sat in his small apartment, holding his daughter's letter, and understood that this was his life now. Reading about his children's joy from a distance. Knowing they existed but being forever excluded. Carrying the knowledge that the family he destroyed had rebuilt itself into something beautiful specifically because he wasn't there to contaminate it with his presence. This was the consequence. This was the price. This was what it meant to choose violence and expect forgiveness, to demand access and receive rejection, to claim ownership and discover you own nothing, not even the love of your own children. Some men spend their lives building legacies. Min-jae had spent his destroying one, and now he would spend whatever years remained learning to live with that reality, with the permanent unchangeable fact that he was the villain of his own story, that his children would tell their children about the biological father who tried to ruin their grandmother's wedding, that his grandchildren would grow up knowing his name only as a cautionary tale about what happens when men mistake control for love and obsession for family. He folded the letter carefully, placed it in a drawer he would open on his worst days to remind himself why isolation was his penance, and began the long process of learning to live with the permanence of his own choices. If you enjoyed this story and haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notification bell so you never miss powerful stories like this. Like this video and share your thoughts in the comments section. Tell me where you're watching from and rate this story 1 to 10. Was justice served? Did Min-jae get what he deserved? Share this video with someone who needs to understand that actions have consequences, that violence destroys everything it touches, and that some losses are permanent. This is the end of Min-jae and Kiru's story. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in my next video.